The young Canadian Carl Bell fell in love with animation when he viewed Fantasia on a Canadian screen when he was 10 years old. There wasn't much animation going on in the Canadian provinces when Carl was growing up. Can we say close to zero? But Carl didn't abandon his love for the medium or his ambition to be an animator inside of it. After art school, Carl did a brief stint in Canadian commercials and then headed for the Big Apple, where animation legend Bill Tytla was running Playhouse Pictures and proved to be instrumental in launching Mr. Bell into an animation career. Tytla suggested that Carl study the great art masters in Europe and then try his hand in Hollywood, since that was where the beating heart of the animation industry lived. Carl took Bill Tytla's advice about Europe and then began employment inside Walt Disney Productions on February 3, 1958. A 40-year career in the world of animation followed, and Mr. Bell labored in the vineyards of most of the cartoon legends. He animated for Bob Clampett and Chuck Jones and Ralph Bakshi, among myriad others, finally returning to Disney 30 years to the day from the time that he started. Mr. Bell is now retired. We spoke in the conference room of the Animation Guild. We are talking today to Carl Bell, who had a 41-year career in animation on November 23rd, 2011. And Carl, we talked this over at lunch, but the thing that fascinated me was you were talking about the iconic figure that sort of got you launched and started in New York City when you came down as a young Canadian to New York City to seek your fame and fortune in animation. So talk a little bit about the gentleman and who he was and what he did for you.
Well, I had been working in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada at a commercial house doing television commercials. And it's very isolated, now I'm in the big city where all of these small studios, do I speak into that?
Or you can talk to me.
Talk to you. And I wanted to see what was being done in animated films. So I went around to Terry Toons, and I knew that Playhouse Pictures was Bill Tytla. Got into the elevator and recognized Bill from a Life magazine photo with the Night on Bear Mountain model.
And he hadn't changed a whole lot?
No, he was totally recognizable.
Good-looking guy with a mustache?
Yeah, heavy set. And we came
And that was the middle 50s?
That was 56, 57. Yeah, 57. And because I had my reel with me from Winnipeg, he assumed I was looking for a job. So he was very distant and cold. And once I said, no, I just want to see what you've been doing here.
Yeah.
And immediately he warmed, and we just became very good friends through the years because of that. I was just eager to know what was happening in the big city. But we stayed friends through the years. He just said, look, you're a free agent. I was on my way to London. He said, go to Europe, see the museums, see the galleries, but come back to California, to the Disney studios. That's the center of the animation universe. And you get the job, I'll tell my friends you're in there. And we stayed friends through the years. Every time I went to New York City, we would have lunch. And at one point, in fact, he wanted me to go back to Montreal and represent him. Mm-hmm. But I said, look, Bill, I've come all this way, and this is where I want to be. Mm-hmm. But just through time, we stayed in touch through the mail. But had I not met Bill Tytla, I probably would have gone back to the National Film Board, because there was no animation industry in Canada at that point.
Yeah, the mid-50s. What was your impression of Bill? Was he... Did he show you what he was working on? What was his manner like? That kind of stuff.
He was generous and, I say, warm. And at that point, the Russian moroseness came in, because he was having to do commercials in the style of a 6-year-old child, and it just hurt him to have had all those years of training and this wonderful draftsmanship ability, and then have to draw like a little baby.
He probably had some regrets that he wasn't doing the stuff at Disney anymore, huh?
Yes, but he showed me a photo on the wall of himself and Walt Disney, who came, at one point, and they got together for a photo shot.
In New York?
Yeah,
Oh,
he came to Bill's studio. But I was told by Bob McCrae at the studio that Teitla had been really a very close friend, and once he went out on the strike, that was it. Nobody else became a close friend.
Walt rang down the curtain on him.
On any kind of personal relationship with anybody. He was very, very close
Really?
in his Disney days. Yeah. But yes, he was, of course, regretful, but he had a career going there, and a very successful one at that point.
Yeah, but not doing exactly the kind of work that he wanted to do.
Not what he was so very capable of.
Yeah, yeah. So you go off to Europe at his suggestion, tour the great museums, and you met somebody in Europe.
Yes, in Venice. No, not Venice, Florence, the city, the art city. And I had gone down into one of the little trattorias, cafeteria, restaurants down below.
Yeah.
And at a long table got into a conversation with an art historian, silver-haired art historian, and his traveling companion. And I was eager, saying animation was the art of the 20th century, and I was hoping to be working at the Disney Studios. So he wrote to his friends in California, Mentor and Louise Huebner. Mentor Huebner was one of the great illustrators, motion picture illustrators like Ben-Hur and Judgment at Nuremberg.
All the biggies.
All the biggies. And Mentor brought me into his home for a week, Louise, and introduced me to blenders. And Mentor was working at MGM at that point. But I took the bus over to Disney and got the job, and then I moved in.
And this was early 1958, right? That was
Yes, that's the February
February 3rd,
1958.
1958.
That's it, exactly, February 3rd. But years later, staying friends with the family, New Year's Eves, and just socializing, we were talking about this art historian friend, and Louise said, "Of course, you've known him for so many years." I said, No, we just met that one night in the trattoria." And she said, "Good God, we could have been inviting an axe murderer into our house."
We had no idea.
But it turned out all right.
Sounds like it. When you got over to Disney in February of '58, your first gig over there was you were in betweening on Sleeping Beauty.
No, it was just the last few months of Sleeping Beauty, half a dozen or so. I was working with Bob McCrae in the animation research department.
Oh,
which
okay.
did
So at that point, you're not even in the animation department.
Well, no, we
Or
did
you're in the animation department not as an artist.
No, yes, I was an in-betweener. Tony Benedict was in there also, in-betweening. We were doing the bridges, the animated bridges between the shorts, because
Oh, okay.
the 1-hour program had, say, Chip and Dale, and then a little new bit of animation in between.
So you were working on you didn't work on Sleeping Beauty, but the TV interstitials.
We were right in with the animation department, and the beauty crew was, interlocking
All around
with
you.
us. Yeah.
So that went on until early 1960, and then you moved on to UPA. And how did that happen?
Well, the point is that the big Sleeping Beauty layoff, where all of the in-between category went out, because I was the only one in animation research, I went out with them. While I was there, I had been socializing with Anesta Haight, who ran the art props department. And
Oh yeah.
looked after all of the animation of the past down in the morgue, as it called in the newspaper industry. So she decided, because I was out there and very new and had no unemployment insurance, to bring me back into her department. I was from Toronto, her husband was from Toronto. That was some kind of a connection.
Oh, sure, as an immigrant, you couldn't collect unemployment, so.
And all Toronto people were obviously nice people, so she brought me in, and I stayed with them for 6 months or so. But it was very frustrating seeing Andy Ingman, the production guy, trying to get back into animation, and he was saying, no, it's all by seniority. So there was just no way to get back into where I wanted to be. Tony Benedict had moved over to UPA with the Magoo television series, and Tony called and said, "Hey, Carl, come over here, do some story sketch." And that was it. If Tony hadn't called, I probably would have stayed on and on and on into the years.
In
at
art
Disney.
props for the next 20 years.
Who knows where, but everything that happened after that would not have happened if Tony hadn't called and I hadn't acted on it. Just as if I hadn't sought out Bill Teitla and he hadn't pointed me in the direction. It's
So
all
Miss-
these lovely interactions.
So everything interconnects.
Everything had a way of being meant to be. I'm quite sure I'm one of the lucky ones.
Yeah. So
So-
Mr. Benedict got you over to UPA and you were working on the Magoos.
Right. Until that just blew
Storyboarding.
up. That just ended.
The funny thing is that Tony then went over to Hanna-Barbera and you moved over to Snowball.
Yeah. And I don't know quite what the connective was there. But
You probably called around and found out there was an opening.
well, I of course called the union offices, and it was hiring, and it's back 50 years. But Irv Anderson, animator, was in there, and I think I knew Irv from some other. He had been at Disney's, not when I was there, but I think it was Irv who said, "Well, let me recommend you to Bob Clampett." And so I came in as an assistant, and then was going nights to USC in the Art Babbitt classes. And Bob Clampett said, "Let me see those tests." And once he saw them, he said, "Hey, you will animate on Beanie and Cecil now."
So you became you animated as a full-fledged animator on Beanie and Cecil.
Yeah, Bob Clampett gave me my first chance at
Full-bore
animating in
animation
Hollywood.
job.
Yeah.
Now, what was he like as a boss? You were telling me a little earlier that he was a wild and crazy guy.
He was just wonderful to be around. He always walked around with a Diet Coke in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
And he was always telling us that I will show you the television series the black and white television series it had been based on.
Oh, the puppet.
Yeah, with Stan Freberg.
Yeah.
And he said, "I will show those to you so you know how Cecil moves." And we never got to see any of the films,
Really?
but every so often he would call us into his office, all the animators, and sit in this tall chair behind him and be explaining how the animation would be. And then all of a sudden, from under the desk, "Oi, Beanie, hi, Beanie Boy," he'd have a puppet on his wrist. And that's the way Beanie moves.
So
Cecil
he would
moves.
demonstrate. He would demonstrate through that.
Yes, we got the idea. They had a contest of what does the rest of Cecil look like, and Jim Fletcher and everybody had wild and zany bodies for Cecil.
Yeah, Bud Hester was telling me that because he was animating over there too. He said that people would run around with squirt guns and leap out at people shooting them with squirt guns at odd moments.
Yeah, and we made 8mm films of stuff that was going on there. But that's where I really got to know Bud Hester and Lou Abbott, who became union representatives as time went on.
Yeah.
But I say, we all through the years just said that was the best we had ever been. They had more of a history. And it was one big room with everybody getting along, just desks placed everywhere. But it was just so agreeable working.
Now their
that way.
studio was in Hollywood, but it wasn't that big, right? It was basically
On Seward Avenue, just above Melrose.
Yeah.
And about a few months before, or a year before Clampett died, I encountered him and Sodi outside of El Coyote restaurant on Beverly. They were leaving and I was coming in. And I'm just so glad that happened because I
Yeah.
got to tell him that we all thought that was one of the greatest working conditions
High
we ever
points of
had.
your career.
Yeah, well, it was just, everybody, as I said, got along. There was no competition or backstabbing or anything that goes.
But you guys cranked a lot of animation. How much animation would you be doing in a given week?
I wouldn't remember the footage. But
Bud said it was
we-
less than Hanna-Barbera, but it was pretty high.
Yeah, and we took it home with footage towards the end when it really got panicky. But regular, just 9 to 5 kind of working, everybody doing their best.
And that was just one season, but
Yeah.
he stretched it out so that it lasted better part of a year.
Yeah, Stoney, the producer, got gray hairs just within that 1 year.
Really?
We all said.
So after that, it was back to Disney in
For the
September of
rest-
1962, and you were working on The Restless Sea.
With Les Clark directing, yeah.
And how was Les, because he was considered, one of the 9 old men, how was he to work for? Because he was directing it. And
Very pleasant, very specific, yes, very dignified. And that was about to end when I got the call from Dave Dedich to come over to Man from Button Willow.
Mm-hmm.
And because it was within a month or so of completion, I gave a letter of resignation to Andy Ingman.
At Disney.
Yes, not knowing that if you ever quit them, they never rehired you.
Oh, really?
They
But
had
they
to
did.
let you go on layoff.
You went back, but it was a few years later.
Yes, when a whole new regime was in place.
But when you resigned, you had no idea that meant, okay,
Yeah.
you're dead to us.
Yeah, but this, as I say, it worked out beautifully because at the Man from Button Willow, coincidentally in the same building as Beanie and Cecil, they were renting from Clampett.
Mm-hmm.
I walked in and there was Don Towsley, whose name I knew from Jiminy Cricket and many Disney films.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, well, that's Don Towsley, and I'm working for him as his assistant. So we got connected there as workers and friends.
Small and incestuous industry where you meet one person and you quickly meet them again.
Much smaller than it was today.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
the-
And it's not that big today, but it was even more compact in 1960, the early 60s.
Yeah. But you would work with people and be great friends, and then you would just kind of not see them for some time, and then you'd be up on another project and another group of friends, or the same ones. It was all interfacing and
Yeah.
meeting over and over again.
And then you had a long and rewarding stint with Chuck Jones at MGM Animation.
Right, and I had gone because after Beanie and Cecil, they had been doing television series nighttime, half a dozen or less studios, specifically for that time slot, which didn't get public acceptance. So all of those studios died. There was
Right.
no work.
Right.
And I called my studio that I'd begun with in Winnipeg, and they said, well, there's a job in Vancouver. So I went north to Canawest and did animation there until I got very homesick and had a green card that needed renewing.
So you
within
came back
6
to Los
months.
Angeles.
So I simply came back to Los Angeles, somehow found out that Don Towsley was up in the tower with Chuck Jones, and poked my head in the door. Hi, Don, and he said, "Come on in, be
And
my
that was
assistant."
That was Sunset Towers, right? Up on the 12th floor.
It was called Tower 12 because it was on the 12th floor. And as I said, Don just said, "Come on in, be my assistant again." And that was the connection that allowed another 6 years of totally delightful employment with Chuck Jones.
So how did we were talking earlier about Chuck and your relationship with him and how he was as a boss. And talk a little bit about that because I found that really interesting.
Well, he had the sign on his door, "My door is always open," and it literally
And he
was.
actually meant it, unlike most.
Only time period where it was cut off was when he was doing the layouts for Tom and Jerry. And Chuck would go in, and the whole week was just to design, time, draw that, and you did not disturb him. And then the rest of the time, it was just very social and very conversational, very pleasant. He would have meetings from time to time with the group and tell us what the plans were. Very much a reader of Mark Twain. He would drop in Mark Twain quotes, but anything that he was planning to do, we would get to hear.
He communicated where the staff was going to be going.
Yes, and it looked like it was going to be a 10-year period, and he let us know that that was the plan.
Yeah, yeah.
And any development within the group would be quite possible. So I was, again, trying to get back from assisting forward into animating.
And you showed him a test.
I did.
Or
I
not
did
him,
I
or you
not?
showed,
I don't
you
remember.
showed one of his.
Somehow I
Major
did
Domo's a
maybe
test.
a few scenes on the Tom and Jerry, but Walt Kelly came in after The Grinch That Stole Christmas, and I did a little test of Pogo and Albert the alligator, with little Pogo walking up and saying, "Heidi, Albert." Walt Kelly said he could not look at pencil test because it hurt his eyes, but Walt looked at my test and said, "I think Mr. Bell is okay," and I was given animation on the Pogo birthday special. So that, and then after that,
You were back into animation.
well, Phantom Tollbooth came along, and Abe Levitow was director on that, and he said, "I want you as my assistant and keep animating."
Now Chuck was producing, right? Wasn't he?
Chuck was
involved?
producing and overseeing the Phantom Tollbooth, yes. But I should say, back to The Grinch, which was the most expensive television special ever made at that point in time. They made a little bit of publicity about that.
Oh yeah.
When it came to Christmas, or maybe it was just for The Grinch That Stole Christmas, Chuck threw a fabulous party for the staff. My mother and father, Irene and Walter, were here visiting, and they were all in part of this party too. This great gathering on the 12th floor.
No, it's all up on the 12th floor. I was wondering if you went to some cushy restaurant.
No, it was all just brought in and just extravagant.
Yeah, I mean, because that special has become iconic, and it's basically one of the touchstones of animation in terms of, he did others in Ricky Tikki Tavi and
Right.
the other stuff around it, but that's the one that seems to have stood the test of time.
Well, Ted Geisel was here a lot of the time, the author, Dr. Seuss, and he had been disappointed with the Warner Brothers versions of his books. So he was in there working very closely with Chuck.
So he and Chuck were working hand in glove?
They did it very much together, and that probably was the strength of the special itself.
So was Geisel storyboarding at all, or was
I
he
don't-
just
I just know
probably
he was-
giving input?
He was just this stately gentleman that was there and working, and we were never directly in contact with him. But the structure is, he was not disappointed in the end result. That's what I'm saying.
Well, because it really follows
Yeah.
the
And
book really
the
closely.
balance, yeah, the balance of the two of them really made the film.
Yeah. And then this whole early 70s period, you were at UPA working on Johnny Learns His Manners and working for Chuck and Abe Levitow and at Sesame Street. How
Yeah.
was that whole period?
Well, Johnny Learns His Manners and How a Bill Becomes a Law were half-hour educational 16mm productions, and that was a nice coincidence, connection in time, because I was about to get my American citizenship, which at that point in time, the judge simply asked you one question. And having been working on how a bill becomes a law. His question was, how does a bill become a law?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was immediately, well, proposed and through the House of Representatives and then the Senate. I just reeled off the technical procedure in Washington, and he said, okay, you're an American citizen.
Yeah, all came from working on these education.
Perfect timing.
Well, it all knits together, as you say.
Yes. Nice linkage.
And then also in the middle 70s, you were working on Raggedy Ann and Andy, which was Richard Williams' big animated feature being done in New York and Los Angeles at the same time.
Right. The camera work, the main body production work was handled by a Mike Sisson in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And Dick wanted top West Coast animators. And we had been friends since 1950. And so he said, well, you just come in and just keep it together. So
Now, how did you meet Richard Williams originally? 1950, because that goes way back, goes back before your animation career began.
again, well, we didn't mention Ontario College of Art, where I was in the drawing and painting, and Dick was a year ahead of me. We came in, I came in, and they had a Halloween dress up. Everybody come in, and whatever I was wearing, Dick was one of the judges, and he said, "This is a good one, you know, he gets the prize." And then we were the only two people in the Ontario College of Art interested in animated film.
Mm-hmm.
So we hit it off immediately.
Hmm.
And we came down to California in '52 in his little Morris Minor to visit the Disney studios.
Mm-hmm.
Dick had been here a couple of years before as a teenager and just astounding them with his draftsmanship and everything. And he wanted to go back to see UPA, and I wanted to go to Disney for the first time. So through Howard Hine in New York City, I got us in as VIP, run around the studio, and he went over to UPA one day. We both came into Disney,
Wow.
and it was the time of Peter Pan.
Oh, yeah, so that was way before you dropped in on Walt's house and started to work for him.
Yes, but I had heard about his storytelling abilities, read about it, and we were with a Look magazine group for a special screening of the work print with the black and white pencil test and piano track and everything, and then color work. And after we came out of the screening room in the halls on the third floor, Walt was coming towards us.
Oh, my God.
And so he just hit upon the reporters and told the sequence of Lady and the Tramp where "What's a Baby?" The lady comes up the stairs and looks over the crib. He acted out that whole thing.
And you were in the hall listening to all this.
Standing and just watching it exactly as described the way he worked. He just was enthusiastically retelling it for these
And that would have been about
reporters.
what, 1952?
52, yeah.
So it was 3 years before the picture came out.
Yeah, summer of 52.
You probably saw more of Walt's storytelling then than you did when you worked for him.
And his fantastic memory back with Bob McRae when I was later, 1958, working with Bob McRae in the animation research. Bob's assistant, David Usher, was looking for the opening "When You Wish Upon a Star" of Jiminy Cricket seated on the candle.
in Pinocchio.
Yeah. And he was looking for a, as they called it, what, 8.5 He was looking for an 8-field little cricket seated on the candle.
Right.
And this word got back to Walt, and Walt said, "You tell that young whippersnapper that was on a 5-field, full figure. We reduced it photographically onto cell, and then painted and shot it." And so talking to Dave, I said, "Wait a minute, there's a television special that has "When You Wish Upon a Star" with cricket in it. that's the animation you're looking for. And Dave went down into the morgue, and there it was, a 5-field small with a full figure cricket. And this was like 20 years before Walt remembered technically how it was done, one scene.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, the memory.
Yeah.
Howard Hughes had the same kind of memory, somebody told me, that worked for him.
I'm sure.
He said he could tell somebody, the plans are in the 4th drawer, in the 5th room, or the 2nd floor, and he said you'd go up to this old building down in Santa Monica, and there would be the plans just where Howard said they'd be. Apparently, Walt had the same quality.
Yeah. And sidebar on Howard Hughes, the main office is in Hollywood. It's a big building,
Yeah.
which I briefly worked in on a Porpoise television special, just a few months.
Yeah.
That was set up with offices in a long hall kind of setup.
Mm-hmm.
And each one had, walls between them as you moved along and back. But the center was open. So you could, all the way back was the Howard Hughes desk that he sat in. So he could always see what people were doing in the offices.
Everybody that was going in and
back
out.
and forth, yeah. And I'd heard about the gold room with the mesh that he went up to get all the bacteria out of his clothes. Someone took me up. It was still there. Sure enough, all floor, ceiling.
Once a germaphobe, always a germaphobe. I think that's the
But it
story that you
kept
bring away from that.
him free of bacteria.
So, Raggedy Ann and Andy. So how was Dick Williams to work for as a director? I mean, you'd known him as a co-student in Canada, and here you were 27 years later.
I always compare he and Ralph Bakshi, that both of them were working entirely for getting it on the screen, no matter what else went around.
Mm-hmm.
And Dick is very. Don Hahn asked me what was he like as an art student when I was over Beauty and the Beast time. And I said same person as he was in the art school, only more so now.
Yeah.
But very intense, very focused, and
All about getting the job done.
exactly to perfection. He's a perfectionist, always has been, always will be.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do you still stay in touch?
Oh yes, we talk by phone. He's over in Bristol at this point, in England. See, he went to England and became world famous, and I came here and got to be part of the animation industry.
Yeah.
Everything has worked out exactly as it should, because when he was in the art school, he was clearly a genius.
Mm-hmm.
And when he did the Phantom Toll Booth, he was called in with Chuck. Please come in and do a storyboard for us. And Dick looked at the walls and saw a Corny Cole storyboard and said, "You don't need me, you've got Corny." And because it was the closest in style and creativity, to his thinking.
Yeah.
So when he did the Raggedy Ann and Andy, he made sure that Corny came in to do the storyboards, which he simply blew up to become layouts. That's the way he worked in England. If he had an artist coming in specifically for the project, specifically for the short subject, for the commercial, he would simply blow up his or the artist's layouts or storyboards or sketches. Those became the layouts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I remember watching an old Hanna-Barbera layout artist, Tony Rivera, and he would do the same thing. Blow up storyboards on the Lucy, and that would be the start of his layouts.
I know Tony and his Lucy because we worked closely with Abe Levito in that UPA setting. There was the one layout artist, Bob Inman, the one background, and the one animator. And Tony and I worked in the same room, Tony Rivera.
I used to watch him at work. He worked in a home studio doing a short a week for Hanna-Barbera. This was in 1960.
Yeah.
So it was around the same time.
He had a wonderful sense of humor, and we were working at UPA. I think you'd have to check the year, but it's shortly after Walt died and all of the founding of CalArts and all of
About
the,
1966, 67.
yes, all of the millions of dollars of money were being distributed. And Tony and I were just working away at our desks and talking about Walt and his life. And Tony got up and went down the hall, and his voice floated back, and he said, "He died broke, you know." I fell off my chair.
And of course, the great irony is everybody dies broke.
Yes.
When you die broke.
You can't take it with you.
You can't take it with you. So you pass through the veil without any of your money.
Yes. Well, you come in penniless, you go out penniless.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the way it works. And then you went from the Sublime to the Brush New Yorker. You went from Richard Williams to, well, you had a little stint at Filmation, but
Yeah.
then you worked at Ralph Bakshi Productions on a whole string of his films for the 3 or 4 years in the late 70s and the early 80s. Now, what was Ralph like as far as your dealings with him?
Well, I got on perfectly with him. I just turned down the volume and I ignored the accent. I just listened to what he was trying to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And I had come in on The Lord of the Rings, where he was actually another person. He was very mystical. He was so kind and fatherly to Leonard Robinson, Leonard. And you know, I'd
Leonard
heard
Robinson,
about,
I know.
yeah, I'd heard about this brute of a man. Here was this gentle, fatherly figure with Robinson.
But he was absorbing the vibes from Lord of the Rings, you think?
Yeah. Yes. That's why I say he was just a mystical other person. And he had a habit of just throwing people against the wall, and he would throw me against the wall, and I was going to a gym at that point, and I'd bounce. So I'd just laugh, and he'd say, "Oh, well, you're younger than I am." And I was a couple of years older than he was. But I went on a 10-city in 7 days tour for American Pop with Ralph.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just 3 or 2 cities a day. I came home and slept for a day and a night, and a day and a night, and a day and a night. But
Wow.
it was just a wonderful.
Was it sort of frenetic being with him on a publicity tour?
Well, I would look at the next stop we were going to, and he would be furious that I wasn't looking 2 or 3 stops ahead. But I said, no, we just have to get there, and then we have to get the next place.
Let's just go one little hurdle at a
Yeah,
time.
but it was a grand adventure, and I just enjoyed every minute of working with Ralph.
Mm-hmm.
And how I got hired by him, I was at Filmation, and he was coming over in a building and interviewing people. We'd all just take a little time off and go over. So he was doing the interview with me,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "How good are you?" And I said, "Well, as good as the next fellow given a chance." "Okay, you're hired."
You sold yourself well enough for him to hire you.
Yeah, and then he, it was the, what do they call it, rotoscope. And,
Yeah, he called it moving Rembrandt.
well, I called it rotostat and photoscope. I just switched the words around. But he gave me the landlord in the early sequence, and I just hit all of the extremes and analyzed all of the slow ins and slow outs. And when he looked at it, it was this brusque, angry landlord slamming out the door.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, I want you to do Aragorn. I want you to do the principal figure.
Mm.
And when we were in his office, he said, and by the way, you look like him. Because at that point, I had hair in the Aragorn style. If you look at the model sheet,
Yeah.
Dale Bear was doing the model sheets. And I said, did you do that? He said, no, I was just trying to put some bread on the table. But years after the film was finished, Dale admitted, yes, he had drawn me
He had used you as a model.
as a model with a broken nose.
Changed a few things.
But I was very nervous. I thought, wait a minute, only Ralph has been in his films. How can I be?
Well, that film was heavily rotoed, but did you guys change the timing and
Exactly.
mix stuff up?
Yeah, I did what I called playing the moviola, because we had the photos themselves stack. I'd put the film on and then run it through with the exposure sheet at my side and pick all of the extremes and what was happening and where the weight was because of gravity.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, for me, it was like early Disney Hyperion days where they analyzed action.
Mm-hmm.
I used it as action analysis and then altered the timing between the extremes.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just tracing.
So it wasn't just tracing the live action.
Not at all, not for me. And Dale Baer did all of these extreme layout poses, not necessarily the extremes, but I put every one of Dale Baer's drawings into the scene I was working on.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because his draftsmanship and structure is so strong.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you were fairly eclectic in your approach. You would
Oh, I got
use
deeply
the
into
people around you.
it. Yes.
And then from Lord of the Rings, you worked on a whole string of other Bakshi projects,
Yep.
right? You worked on American Pop, and you didn't work on Fritz the Cat.
No, that was before I got there. See, that was
No, that was earlier. That was the early 70s.
yeah,
and
that
you
was the
worked.
wild break all rules, be offensive, and at one point he said, you can't offend everyone, but you can try." That was his philosophy.
That was Ralph's philosophy.
on
Yeah.
Fritz the Cat.
My brief brush up with him, yeah, it was kind of the same. So I would agree with that.
No, we had a wonderful working friendship. It was just a good time.
And when did that come to an end? In 1982, he wrapped it up with his string of films at that time.
That was Fire and Ice, and he sent me over to Korea to supervise one sequence because he was running out of money and it was cheaper to do that.
Yeah.
And then I came back and it was pretty much ending, so it just everybody.
You segued over to Filmation.
Yeah, Filmation provided a very nice stopgap between these really interesting chunks of time.
And you were at Filmation all through the middle 80s, from 82 until 1987.
Right.
And what was the studio like? I was there right at the end. The last year it was up and running, which was after you left. I was there on Bugsburg and a few other development things, but
Well, it was a very stock thing because you worked with stock animation and worked in and out of it, and it was, an assembly line to make a television series, with whatever the series was.
yeah,
The same
yeah.
process. The same.
And you worked on their feature of the period, which didn't do very well, Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night.
Yeah.
You were an animator on
I
that?
had a few animation scenes in there. I don't remember what they were at this point, but that was in another building. That wasn't even in the Filmation in Reseda.
And then it looks like 30 years to the day you returned to Disney. How did that happen?
Magic Circle, meant to be, fate, kismet.
I mean, how did you get back over there? Because, Filmation was still rolling along.
Oh, a pragmatic answer, yes. Well, Filmation, what did it work? I had gone in to see Dale and Jane Baer when I knew Roger Rabbit was in production,
Yeah.
and there wasn't any opening. And then I was still at Filmation, and suddenly Jane or Dale called and said, "We'd like you to come in as an assistant and work with a particular person whose name is escaping me for the moment." And I said, yes. I've been trying to get back into the Disney studios for 30 years.
And here's your chance.
Let's go with it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to be where I want to be, because it was the Disney brothers being here that brought me here. It wasn't the mountains and the sea and the beach. It was, they were established, and that's where I wanted to be. And so I came in and then segued. Yes, I came in on Roger Rabbit, and it was supposed to be only for that. But then they said, okay, come over on Oliver and Company. and then just segue onto Little Mermaid. So I segued from feature to feature until
So all through that
1999.
period, from the end of the 80s to the end of the 90s, you just went from one Disney feature after another.
Pretty
And
much.
what are your memories of that whole period? Because they moved over to Flower. I mean, they left. They had. I think when you got there, they had already left the animation building.
Yeah,
And,
no, yes, they were in the flower warehouses. And then it was announced that a studio was being designed and to be built.
They're on
And we
Riverside
kept,
Drive.
kept up to date on that, and then we all moved into the Walt Disney Feature Animation Building.
Yeah. So how did you find the Flower Street facility and the people there, and then finally moving back to just across the street from the main lot?
Well, everybody was very enjoyable to work with in the Flower Street, and we would go onto the main lot for lunches and things.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very good group, 750 people, I think, at peak.
Yeah, it was quite a few.
And they all, simply like myself, wanted to draw for a living, and that's what I was able to do. And then it all just went away. 2 years after I'd left, it was pretty much CGI.
And you departed.
replaced.
What was the last feature that you worked on at
Right
Disney
up to
Feature?
Tarzan, just was there as Tarzan was beginning.
So did you work on Tarzan?
Maybe a couple drawings, a couple scenes, but Marge Randolph,
Marge Randolph in charge of HR.
yes, she called me in on Steamboat Willie's birthday, November 18,
99,
98,
98.
and she said, "We have no assignment for you." They were team building at that point, like a baseball team.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, "Well, can I opt to retire then?" And she said, "Yes, you'll be a Walt Disney Studio retiree," and picked up the clipboard and started doing all the paperwork. And then they allowed me 6 months to decompress from pressure and stress. And,
So they kept paying you.
oh yes, and I was doing occasional work on scenes, but it was basically just let him get used to being a Walt Disney Studio retiree.
Wow.
Kept the umbilical cord, don't you see?
Yeah. So of that whole string, because you worked on all of the biggies in that period, right?
Yeah,
Didn't
oh
you
yeah, that
work
was the
on-
high point.
You worked on Little Mermaid. You worked on, we'll skip Rescuers Down Under. But you worked on Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and Lion King.
Yeah.
So you were on the crew for all of those.
Well, there was a chart that was published in the pegboard
Yeah.
that showed the animation industry, the peak, after Roger Rabbit, how it
Yeah, it
went
sort
up.
of peaked around 95, 96.
And then it slowly started coming down.
Yeah.
And that was the period I was in there. And the studio itself matched that chart.
Yeah.
But The Lion King, very few people wanted to work on it. They
Yeah.
said it was Bambi in Africa, and didn't get it. And
Yeah.
so you had your choice of work on Lion King, Fantasia 2000, or just take drawing the human figure, just go into those sessions. So I said,
Yeah.
well, I'd like to just improve my drawing for the production line. I'll go with the group that's going to be drawing from the model.
Yeah.
So that's what I did while Lion King was on.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. But they kept the crew together because DreamWorks was going at that point.
And
they
everybody was.
didn't want to lose anybody to DreamWorks.
So did you get it? You got in on all of the bonuses and all of that stuff. At
Yeah,
that
there'd be a
period
little
of time.
bonus for everybody. The big guys got the big bonuses, and the big guys had agents to negotiate everything.
Yeah, yeah.
you know the period. Well,
And yeah, because I was in and out of that studio a lot during that period. But going back a few years,
sure.
one of the people that you met in your first stint at Disney, Mark Davis, you got to be friends with, and that friendship pretty much continued right through to the end of Mark's life, didn't it? When it
Yeah.
was,
I was there for his birthday party, which was the 80th, or I'm not sure, but I was there for several dinners through the years.
mm-hmm.
And he was just always very pleasant storyteller. He said that when he and his wife moved into their house, which is up above the old Hyperion site.
Right, up there near the high school.
Yeah, when he talked to Walt and he said, you know, we live just up above the studios, and Walt said, oh, Mark, we're not going to move back there anymore.
And he was right, they never did.
Yeah.
But you were telling me, the funny story that you told me is when you first met him, you went into his room and he was working on Maleficent, and when he had it in the back of his mind that he might move over to WED at some point, or maybe that was before that, and you said to me that the young guys were
Well, it was that we were talking. He was trying to work, and I was saying, "How do I get back into the animation bit?" You know,
right, because you were on the
section.
production management side of that.
And he was saying, you know, the young guys here are just waiting for me to die so they can sit at my desk. And it was shortly after that he was over at WED
Right.
and doing the Pirates of the Caribbean and all.
Did he ever tell you why he said, okay, I've had enough of animation and now it's time to go over and do this?
No, but he was just so versatile and so much an artist that he would just move on to another area of art.
Yeah.
And those sketches of his, the color sketches of the pirates, Alice told me that they were being exhibited as a work in progress at a gathering that Walt Disney was present. And he said to Alice, look at these sketches of Mark's. And she said, oh, well, I've seen them. I've seen them. He said, no, look at them. They are the work of a genius. So she took a second look. You know?
Oh, I see.
Oh, I'm married to a genius, I guess, a master illustrator.
Incredible.
Yeah, all
So-
sorts of moments, people.
Yeah. That's amazing. Now, I always like to end with the ever popular, when you were a kid, we sort of will go back now to your beginnings when you had the first stirrings of you wanted to get into the animation business, because we never talked about it.
Yeah.
And so my question is, what inspired you or drew you to get into the animation business in the first place? Because you're a long way from the industry up in the wilds of Canada.
Yeah. Well, I'm 9 or 10 when I see The Reluctant Dragon, and that was the visit to the Disney studio, and that started it.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wanted to know how it was done, and you know, where could I get cells to paint and
All that stuff, yeah. I've
Yeah.
heard variations of that story from almost every animation artist that's come through here. They're all slightly different,
yeah,
but they all have sort of the touchstone of they've seen not always a Disney product, but often a Disney
Yeah.
product up on the silver screen, and they want to get into that, and how do they do it?
but the real one was Fantasia.
Yeah.
And that was released, I was like 10, I guess, at that point. That was released in a cut version. And I saw it with flat sound. And I raced home to tell Irene, oh, there's this wonderful stereophonic sound where the sound comes all the way around the theater. I had read about it in Look magazine.
Yeah.
But it totally pulled me in, and I would have favorite sections, like first of all the Nutcracker and then the Rite of Spring. And I literally, because I was a year younger than my classmates in junior high school, I literally quit for a year to stay in Toronto to see the uncut version of Fantasia, which was about to arrive when we were about to finish our Toronto visit.
Oh, okay.
And then
But you didn't see that until a long time later.
no,
then,
but
though.
you know, it was so much into me. Like, seeing Fantasia through the years was like going to church. It was,
And what was your favorite segment?
well, I say it was early. It would be one and then the other, and then it was just the entire thing.
And then, of course, one of the guys that was a mover and shaker on Fantasia sort of helped you launch into the industry, Bill
Yeah.
Teitla.
Yeah, but you know, when I got there and we couldn't get anywhere in animation because it was all set in stone. Walt had found the people that could do his work. He was loyal to them. They were loyal to him. And I was working on the art of animation, a traveling exhibit in the big sound stage there for this Hesta Haight lady.
Mm-hmm.
One day we were outside looking at plans for the panels and the screeners and the projectors. And Walt and the suits were coming up towards us because Walt wanted to see all of these plans too.
Mm-hmm.
And so Hesta Haight made a point to say, Walt, I want you to meet Carl Bell.
Mm-hmm.
At which point I shook his hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought through the years, I don't know how many people working there for years ever got to shake hands with Walt Disney.
And what year was that?
That would be 59.
50. That was early on. That was
Yeah.
in your first stint there.
Yeah, but when I came back 30 years later and then retired 11 years after that, I was the president of the Golden Ears Society, which was retirees.
Yeah, yeah.
And at one of the meetings, I told this story about shaking hands with the creature from another planet because I said, I'm sure that's what has protected me through the next 40 years of my career.
Really?
Yeah, because
Amazing.
he really was a creature from another planet.
He seemed to
No
move in
question.
a different vibration.
Any which way you want to look at it.
Yeah, amazing. So, I think we've pretty much covered the gamut. Do you have anything you want to add? Were there any other pieces of animation that inspired you, that made you want to get into the business?
Well, friend Dick Williams, just his creativity and, the originality that's always been there, the friendship and the professional admiration.
Yeah, yeah.
But just overall, the whole thing has been very satisfying. And 11 years later, I just say I was very happy and honored to be in the animation industry, and I'm equally happy to be out of it. That one life was complete and another life continues.
Well, that's great. And thank you, Mr. Bell, for sharing all of these.